Welcome, curious minds, to another compelling exploration on AI history of Western philosophy.
Great to be diving into another fascinating figure.
Today, we're embarking on a journey into the provocative and, well, sometimes pretty confrontational world of Thrasymachus of Chalcedon.
Ah, yes, Thrasymachus. Definitely stirs the pot.
His very name, potentially meaning fierce fighter, it sort of perfectly captures his role in challenging the bedrock of Western thought, the meaning and value of justice itself.
It's a challenge that, surprisingly, still feels incredibly relevant today, doesn't it?
It really does. So
Yeah.
our aim in this exploration is to try and unravel the intricate layers of this figure who basically ignited one of philosophy's most enduring debates.
Yeah, he shifted the conversation from these polite definitions of justice to a really stark confrontation over what it actually means or is worth to live a just life.
Exactly. Now, before we jump in, a quick but important note we always like to make here on AI history of Western philosophy.
Right. The disclaimer.
AI-generated content, specifically this podcast, it can confabulate. That means presenting ideas as fact sometimes. And though our subject is philosophy, we are definitely not philosophers ourselves.
That's key. Our mission, beyond pointing you towards the original sources, which we always encourage, is really to experiment with philosophy as material.
And hopefully generate some new possibilities for thought. So keep that in mind as you listen.
Okay, so Thrasymachus, what's truly fascinating here is how he transcends being just, a character in an ancient text.
He's more than just a voice in Plato's dialogue.
Absolutely. He's often seen as the intellectual ancestor, the progenitor even, of a really potent tradition of political realism and moral critique.
A tradition that echoes from antiquity right up to our present day.
It does. He doesn't just invite us to question things. He actively forces us, you could say, to confront these deeply held assumptions we have about power, about morality, even about human nature itself.
And throughout our discussion, we'll need to navigate this critical tension, won't we? The difference between the historical guy, the rhetorician.
Right, the actual historical rhetorician, a master of persuasion in his own time.
Versus the aggressive, often seemingly contradictory immoralist that Plato paints in his iconic work, The Republic.
That's the core tension we'll be exploring.
Okay, so let's dive straight into the core of his challenge then. Our source material vividly describes his eruption into Plato's Republic. You can almost picture him bursting forth like a wild beast about to spring.
It's an incredibly dramatic entrance. Plato really sets the scene.
And his foundational claim, the one that truly shakes the philosophical foundations, is this: justice is nothing other than the advantage of the stronger.
Wow, yeah. That's a remarkably bold and, frankly, unsettling claim to just throw into a philosophical discussion, isn't it?
Definitely. So today, we're going to meticulously trace the historical Thrasymachus, try to understand the man behind the myth.
Then analyze his pivotal dramatic function in Plato's dialogue. He's not just there by accident.
No. Then we'll systematically deconstruct his doctrine, that advantage of the stronger idea.
And finally, follow his powerful, enduring legacy through Western thought, right up to its startling relevance in our modern world.
Seems like quite a journey. Let's start with the man himself, the historical Thrasymachus, uncovering the sophist behind the persona. Before we get into the formidable debater Plato immortalizes, let's try to peel back those layers. Who was the historical Thrasymachus? What can we actually glean about his life, his career, beyond that powerful portrayal in the Republic?
Well, if we try to piece together the historical fragments, we see a dedicated professional, someone deeply immersed in the vibrant political and rhetorical culture of his time.
An era marked by pretty significant intellectual and social upheaval, right?
Yep.
Late 5th century Athens.
Exactly. Thrasymachus himself was a citizen of Chalcedon, which was a Megarian colony strategically located on the Bosphorus, that's modern-day Turkey.
Okay, so not originally an Athenian then.
No, he was a Metoikos, a resident foreigner in Athens. Scholars generally place his birth around 459 BCE and his death around 400 BCE. So yeah, he's right in the heart of that late 5th century Athenian intellectual ferment.
And despite being an outsider, he made quite a name for himself.
He certainly did. He established himself as a prominent sophist, those itinerant professional teachers of rhetoric, and he became a highly sought-after speechwriter, a logographus within the city. People would pay him to write speeches for them for court or politics.
So he wasn't just some obscure figure. He was like an intellectual celebrity of his day, someone people knew and talked about.
Absolutely. We have evidence of his fame dating back surprisingly early, actually, to around 427 BCE.
Oh, how so?
The famous comic playwright Aristophanes, in his lost play, Banqueters, actually makes a joke about Thrasymachus.
No way. So to be joked about by Aristophanes.
Exactly. He must have already achieved a significant level of public recognition in Athens. It suggests that by his early 30s, he was already a well-known figure, meaning he'd probably been actively teaching for several years before that.
And this period, the late 5th century BCE, was incredibly turbulent, wasn't it? The Peloponnesian War.
Right, the war with Sparta, plus what's often called the sophistic Enlightenment, this explosion of new ideas, new ways of arguing, questioning traditional values. He was right in the thick of it.
A contemporary of other big names like Protagoras, Gorgias.
Gorgias, Hippias, Prodicus, yeah, all those major sophists shaping the intellectual landscape.
And these sophists, they were known, perhaps infamously, for charging fees, often pretty high ones, for their teaching. That really set them apart from figures like Socrates, right? Was Thrasymachus like that too?
That's spot on. His profession involved instructing the ambitious sons of wealthy Athenians in the sophisticated arts of persuasion and argumentation.
Skills you absolutely needed back then.
Crucial skills, yeah. If you wanted to succeed in the democratic assembly, where public speaking was paramount, or in the often litigious law courts of Athens.
So he was teaching practical skills for success.
Definitely. And charging considerable, maybe even exorbitant fees was a defining characteristic of the sophists. Thrasymachus was no exception. Some ancient sources even suggest he lived a pretty opulent lifestyle.
Which is a stark contrast to the Socratic ideal, isn't it? That disinterested pursuit of truth for its own sake.
A complete contrast, yeah. While we don't know many details about his personal life, he was clearly a highly successful professional, deeply immersed and influential in the political and rhetorical culture of his dynamic era.
And when did he likely die?
He's presumed to have died of natural causes around 400 BCE, which coincidentally is just a year before Socrates' own execution in 399.
Wow. Okay, so it's fascinating that he was primarily known as a master rhetorician, not necessarily a philosopher in the way we think of Socrates or Plato. What exactly were his innovations in rhetoric that made him so influential?
He was highly regarded for significantly advancing the techna, the art or craft of oratory, particularly in prose style.
What's his style? How so?
Well, he was among the first to really develop a more rhythmic and structured form of prose. Think about making speeches sound almost lyrical, more memorable, more compelling.
So like adding rhythm to spoken word.
Exactly. Specifically through the use of something called a peonic rhythm. That's like a pattern of long and short syllables. This innovation aimed to make oratory more compelling, more memorable, blurring the lines between just everyday conversation and the formal power you usually found in poetry.
He was enhancing the impact of speeches, making them stick.
Precisely. Think about how a well-crafted melody makes words stick in your head. Thrasymachus was applying a similar kind of principle to spoken prose.
So he was making public speeches resonate in a way they hadn't before, almost elevating them. And it wasn't just about sounding good, was it? He was also really interested in the psychology of persuasion.
Exactly right. His interest went way beyond just aesthetic polish. His primary focus was the psychological dimension specifically, the strategic appeal to emotion, how to make the audience feel a certain way.
And even Plato acknowledged this skill, despite their differences.
Yes, even Plato, who, as we'll get into, was philosophically quite hostile to him, acknowledged this expertise in his dialogue, the Phaedrus. Socrates himself observes that Thrasymachus could skillfully, quote, arouse anger in many and then allay their anger with charms and incantations, masterful manipulation of emotions.
Wow. So he could whip up a crowd and then calm them down again?
Apparently so. And the titles of his lost works really confirm this systematic technical approach to rhetoric. He wrote things like a great textbook, manuals on crafting introductions called proemia, works on building powerful lines of reasoning called preponderant arguments.
So guides on how to argue effectively.
Right. And most tellingly, he wrote Appeals to Compassion, or Elioi, which was specifically dedicated to techniques of emotional manipulation, how to make the audience feel pity.
That's quite specific.
It is. And this emphasis on artful delivery, evoking strong emotional responses, the strategic use of persuasive technique, often, prioritized over a strict commitment to objective truth, that was really a hallmark of the broader sophistic movement.
Which brings us to a crucial question, doesn't it? What happens when the pursuit of technique of emotional effect takes precedence over a commitment to objective truth?
Exactly. It's a tension that philosophers like Plato grappled with deeply. They saw rhetoric as this powerful tool that could easily be used for manipulation rather than purely as a vehicle for uncovering and conveying truth. A dangerous tool, potentially.
Okay, so beyond Plato's powerful, but as you said, maybe polemical portrayal, what can we actually gather about Thrasymachus' own thoughts? We have a few rare fragments, right? Glimpses into his actual voice. What do these non-Platonic sources reveal?
These fragments are incredibly insightful. They really suggest a figure far more complex, more politically nuanced than the sort of brutish immoralist that Plato often presents.
Okay, like what?
Well, most substantial fragment we have is from a political oration preserved by a later writer, Dionysius of Halicarnassus. And intriguingly, it reveals a surprisingly conservative and almost moralistic tone.
Conservative Thrasymachus. That doesn't quite fit the Republic image.
Not at all. In this speech, he's lamenting the decline of Athenian civic virtue. He expresses this longing, quote, to have belonged to that long past time when the young were content to remain silent, and while the older men were correctly supervising affairs of state. Sounds almost nostalgic.
Like an old man complaining about the youth of today.
Kind of, and he squarely blames the contemporary administrators for the city's misfortunes, accusing them of exchanging peace for war and sacrificing concord for enmity and internal disturbance.
So he's criticizing the current leadership and yearning for stability.
Exactly. This critical stance on current leadership, this apparent nostalgia for stability and traditional order, it contrasts quite sharply with the radical power-worshipping figure in Plato. It paints a picture of a thinker concerned with political stability, with good governance, rather than just advocating for raw, amoral power for its own sake.
That's a really significant difference. What other glimpses do these fragments offer?
Well, there's another fragment, this one from a diplomatic speech he apparently delivered on behalf of the people of Larissa in Thessaly. It perfectly showcases his practical rhetorical skill in action.
Okay.
The line is, "Shall we who are Greeks be the slaves of Archelaus the barbarian?" It's a masterfully crafted appeal to Panhellenic pride, Greek identity and fear of foreign domination, almost certainly directed against the ambitions of King Archelaus I of Macedon.
So using rhetoric for high-stakes politics.
Precisely. It demonstrates his direct engagement in interstate politics, using his rhetorical prowess to achieve very concrete political aims for his clients.
Okay, but you mentioned one fragment was maybe the key to his whole worldview, the theological one.
Ah, yes. Perhaps the most philosophically significant fragment, and potentially the very key to reconciling the historical figure with the Platonic character, is this brief statement on theology and justice.
What does it say?
It's profound, he says. The gods do not see human affairs. Otherwise, they would not have overlooked the greatest of all blessings among mankind, justice. For we see mankind not using this virtue.
Wow. That's bleak. Basically, if gods existed and cared, they wouldn't let the world be so unjust.
Exactly. It's a powerful, deeply pessimistic statement. And it offers a potential pathway to understand his overall worldview and connect it to his political realism.
How so? How does this idea of a godless or at least indifferent cosmos connect directly to his political ideas? Can we really reconstruct a logical chain from this one sentence leading to his famous declaration about justice being the advantage of the stronger?
I think we absolutely can. And this reconstruction is crucial because it transforms Thrasymachus' famous thesis from what might seem like just a burst of cynical brutality.
Which is how it often comes across.
Right. Into something more like a disillusioned but remarkably coherent conclusion. Something derived from a pessimistic, almost empirical analysis of politics in a world devoid of divine intervention or oversight. It connects his theological skepticism directly to his political realism.
Okay, walk me through that logical chain. How does he get from indifferent gods to might makes right?
Okay, let's trace it. First, you have his pessimistic premise. The cosmos is devoid of divine oversight. There's no transcendent enforcement of a moral order. If the gods don't intervene and we see injustice everywhere, then justice clearly isn't some divine blessing they care about or enforce.
Step one, no cosmic justice system.
Right. The immediate consequence of that is profound. The search for some divine or natural inherent standard for justice becomes entirely futile, pointless. If there's no God-given moral law, no cosmic blueprint, then our inquiry has to turn entirely to the empirical world. We have to look at what actually happens in human societies.
Okay, look at the facts on the ground.
Exactly. Next, he makes a crucial observation about nomoi laws and customs. What people call justice is simply the established set of rules that communities create and enforce. It's a social construct, not natural, not divine.
So justice is man-made rules?
Yes. Then you ask, who makes these rules? Consistently, these rules are created and enforced by the dominant ruling power in any state, Whether that's a democracy, an oligarchy, a tyranny, doesn't matter. The powerful make the rules.
Okay, rulers make the rules. Why?
And what then is the purpose of these rules? A realistic, maybe cynical analysis of human motivation suggests that rulers craft these rules primarily to secure their own power and advance their own interests. Not primarily for the common good, but for their good.
Self-interest is the driver.
Pretty much. So from this entire chain of observation and deduction in different gods, justice as man-made rules, rules made for the powerful's benefit, the conclusion becomes almost inescapable. Justice, as it actually exists and functions in the real human world, is nothing other than the advantage of the stronger.
It's a stark conclusion, but you can see the logic now. It's derived from his worldview.
Exactly. It's disillusioned, it's stark, but it's undeniably coherent, thoroughly grounded in his initial theological skepticism and his subsequent empirical analysis of power. It reveals him as a far more formidable and systematic thinker than just a simple bully. 2. The Platonic Thrasymachus, the icon of immoralism in Republic.
Okay, so now let's shift our focus to the version of Thrasymachus that has truly captured the philosophical imagination for millennia. His explosive, unforgettable appearance in the very first book of Plato's Republic.
Ah, the Platonic Thrasymachus, a character for the ages.
Our sources aptly describe Plato's portrayal as a masterpiece of philosophical drama, right? Where his mannerisms, his whole demeanor, are almost as significant as his arguments.
That's what's truly fascinating. Plato masterfully employs him not just as a participant in a debate, but as a dramatic character whose very entrance and behavior embodies his radical philosophical position.
He doesn't just walk in politely.
No, he literally erupts into it. Plato's narrative describes him needing to be physically restrained by the other guests, almost coiling himself up like a wild beast, as if he would tear us to pieces.
Wow, that's quite an image, a wild beast.
It is. This violent, almost animalistic, untamed force is presented as a vivid, physical manifestation of his intellectual stance, this raw, primal challenge to the more measured, civilized Socratic discourse.
And his name, Fierce Fighter, seems almost too perfect.
It really does seem to have directly inspired Plato's powerful casting of him in this combative, disruptive role.
So his aggressive persona isn't just for dramatic flair. It's an integral part of the philosophical statement Plato wants to make about his ideas. It embodies his worldview.
Precisely. And his very first act upon finally speaking, it further emphasizes this. He immediately demands payment for giving his definition of justice.
Right. That's so sophist.
Totally. It instantly embodies that sophistic practice of treating knowledge like a commodity, something to be bought and sold, rather than a good to be pursued freely for its own sake.
The stark contrast with Socrates' whole approach.
Absolutely. Thrasymachus, in that moment, represents the notion that knowledge is power, and that power, like any valuable commodity, is for sale to those who can afford it.
And he's not a fan of Socrates' methods either, is he?
Not at all. He displays this profound impatience with Socrates' characteristic method of refutation, the elenchus, that persistent back-and-forth questioning designed to expose contradictions.
He finds it annoying.
Deeply. He dismisses Socrates' customary profession of ignorance as his usual irony, and fiercely attacks him for just asking questions and refuting others without offering any positive doctrines of his own.
He wants answers, not more questions.
Exactly. Thrasymachus in this scene represents a demand for certainty, for a powerful, definitive answer that cuts through what he sees as Socrates' philosophical evasiveness and, frankly, foolishness. He's not interested in subtle dialectic. He wants to lay down the law.
All right, let's meticulously unpack the trajectory of this challenge from the immoralist. He keeps pushing the boundaries of conventional morality, doesn't he? What are the pivotal claims that build up his audacious argument?
Yeah, his argument unfolds not as just one simple statement, but as a series of escalating, increasingly radical claims. The opening salvo, the one that echoes through history, is that famous declaration. Justice is nothing other than the advantage of the stronger.
The big one.
The big one. And he immediately clarifies this in starkly political terms. He says, look, in any state, tyranny, democracy, aristocracy, whatever the ruling party enacts laws, nomoi, that are fundamentally designed to serve its own interests.
Okay, laws benefit the lawmakers.
Right. These self-serving laws are then declared just for the subjects, and any deviation from them is swiftly punished as unjust. So for the subjects, justice becomes pretty straightforward. Simple, unquestioning obedience to the will of the powerful. A clear, if deeply cynical, political definition.
But Socrates, being Socrates, doesn't just let that stand, does he? He finds a little loophole, a contradiction.
Indeed. Socrates' first refutation targets that potential contradiction. He points out, well, Rulers are human, they're fallible. They can sometimes make mistakes, enact laws that might inadvertently be to their disadvantage.
Oops, made a law that hurts me instead of helps me.
Exactly. So if justice is strictly obedience to all laws, then logically it would sometimes be just to do what is not to the advantage of the stronger. A neat little trap.
How does Thrasymachus get out of that one?
He executes a really crucial philosophical maneuver. He refines his position. He starts talking about the ruler in the precise sense. An expert, an ideal craftsman of ruling.
Ah, the ideal ruler.
Yes, this ideal ruler, insofar as he is truly exercising his craft, is infallible and never errs about what truly serves his own advantage. This introduces a much more rigorous, almost idealized standard into his argument. It's not just any ruler anymore, but the perfect ruler, conceptually.
So he's essentially saying, my definition applies to the ruler when they're actually ruling properly, not when they mess up.
Pretty much. He's tightening the definition. And compelled to defend this more rigorous position, Thrasymachus then broadens his claim into a general ethical thesis with huge implications.
Okay, what's that?
He asserts that justice is really someone else's good, allotrian agathon, while injustice, conversely, is always to one's own profit and advantage.
So being just helps others, being unjust helps yourself.
That's the core of it. And to hammer this home, he provides detailed, very relatable, empirical examples. He argues, look, in any business partnership, the just man invariably ends up with less.
The honest partner gets cheated.
Right. The just man consistently pays more taxes on the same property. When holding public office, the just man meticulously attends to public affairs, neglecting his own, gaining no personal profit, while the unjust man does the exact opposite and always comes out ahead.
He's painting a picture where being good gets you screwed over.
Precisely. And this line of argument culminates in this unapologetic, even enthusiastic praise of perfect injustice personified by the tyrant.
The ultimate unjust man.
Yes. The tyrant, he declares, by stealth and force takes away what belongs to others, not bit by bit, but all at once. Such a person, Thrasymachus asserts with conviction, isn't condemned but is lauded, called happy and blessed by society.
Happy and blessed for being a tyrant.
That's his claim. He concludes that injustice, when practiced on a sufficiently grand scale, is undeniably stronger, freer, and more masterly than justice. He completely inverts conventional values.
He's saying injustice is good and justice is foolish.
Exactly. He audaciously claims injustice is a virtue, a sign of wisdom, while justice is merely a form of sublime simplicity, or, more brutally, high-minded foolishness. Being just is being a naive sucker.
That's a powerful and deeply unsettling challenge to basically all conventional morality. But Socrates isn't done yet, is he? How does he systematically try to dismantle this radical position? And what's the dramatic climax of their debate, the famous part?
Right. Socrates, with characteristic persistence, launches a series of counter-arguments. First, he skillfully revisits that craft analogy Thrasymachus himself introduced.
The ruler as a craftsman.
Yes. Socrates argues, look, every true craft medicine, ship piloting, even carpentry, fundamentally has as its object the good of its subject matter. The patient, the sailors, the wood. It's not primarily for the good of the practitioner.
The doctor works for the patient's health, not just his own fee.
Exactly. Therefore, a true ruler, conceived as a craftsman of the state, must inherently aim at the good of the ruled subjects.
Makes sense. How does Thrasymachus respond?
He scorns it. He rejects this with a powerful counterexample, the shepherd. A shepherd, he points out, tends his flock not for the sheep's own good, but to fatten them up for his own profit and eventual consumption.
Ouch. That's a pretty cynical but effective rebuttal. Rulers are shepherds, subjects are sheep for shearing.
It definitely highlights the self-interested, potentially exploitative nature of power. It's a strong counter.
So where does Socrates go from there? What's his next move?
His next move is to argue that the just person is inherently wise and good, while the unjust person is ignorant and bad.
How does he argue that?
He uses another analogy. An expert in any field, say a master musician, that expert seeks to be in harmony with other experts and only wants to outdo, or pleonectine, the ignorant non-expert. They don't compete with fellow musicians on basic tuning, for instance.
Okay, experts cooperate on fundamentals.
Right. The ignorant person, by contrast, tries to outdo everyone, both expert and non-expert alike. They think they know better than everybody.
The amateur thinks they're better than the pro.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Socrates then draws the parallel. Since the just person seeks to excel only over their arm, Unlike the unjust, while the unjust person is driven by pleonexia, that insatiable desire to have more than everyone and seeks to outdo everyone, the just person resembles the wise and good expert.
And the unjust person resembles the ignorant amateur.
Precisely. So, by this logic, justice aligns with expertise and wisdom, while injustice is linked to ignorance and being out of tune with reality.
Interesting analogy. What else does Socrates argue?
Finally, and perhaps most profoundly, he argues from the very function of justice itself. He claims that injustice inherently creates factions, hatred, and conflict.
Injustice breeds distrust.
Yes. Any group that practices it, even a hypothetical band of perfectly unjust robbers, will ultimately be incapable of effective collective action because they'll constantly be trying to cheat and undermine each other.
Can't even trust your fellow criminals if everyone's unjust.
Exactly. And crucially, Socrates argues, injustice does the exact same thing within the individual soul. It creates internal discord, fragmentation, disharmony. The soul is at war with itself.
Inner conflict.
Right. Since justice is the specific virtue or excellence of the soul, and a thing can only perform its function well through its own virtue, it logically follows that the just soul and the just man will live well and consequently be happy. The soul functions properly.
And the unjust man.
The unjust man, with his soul in turmoil, will live badly and be wretched. Justice, in this view, becomes synonymous with internal psychic harmony, health, and flourishing.
Okay, so after all these intricate arguments, what happens to Thrasymachus himself? Does he just give up? What's the famous moment?
The climax. At the conclusion of these arguments, Thrasymachus, who started with such aggressive confidence, is finally reduced to sullen agreement. He sort of grunts his assent, and then, quite famously, he blushes.
He blushes. Why is that so significant? It's just embarrassment.
It's far more than just embarrassment or a literary flourish. Plato uses it as a philosophical refutation in itself. Think about it. Thrasymachus' entire position rests on the premise that moral norms are nothing but external conventions, nomoi, things to be disregarded by the strong individual pursuing pure self-interest.
Right. Morality is just rules for suckers.
Exactly. Yet his own actions and reactions within the dialogue betray this deep-seated, involuntary commitment to the very norms he claims to reject. He gets visibly enraged when he thinks Socrates is arguing unfairly, implicitly appealing to some unstated norm of proper, honest debate.
You want Socrates to play by the rules he says don't matter.
Precisely. His intense desire to win the argument, to be recognized as right, is itself a fundamental desire for social validation and intellectual consistency. Things that shouldn't matter if only brute advantage counts.
Yeah, I see. The blush shows he's not purely self-interested.
The blush is the ultimate undeniable evidence of this profound internal contradiction. As an involuntary physiological response to shame, it vividly demonstrates that Thrasymachus is not, in fact, truly free from the social and rational norms he so confidently debunks. His own body betrays his philosophy.
His body gives him away.
Yes. And Plato, through this powerful detail, suggests that the fundamental desire for reason, consistency, social esteem, these aren't just conventions. They're deeply rooted in human nature, in physis. The Thrasymachus soul, when exposed, is revealed to be at war with itself.
Unstable, contradictory.
Exactly. An unstable and fundamentally contradictory state, which is a truly powerful dramatic prelude to the central argument of the rest of the Republic, which will spend 9 more books defining justice precisely as a state of profound internal psychic harmony and balance. The blush shows why that harmony is needed. 3. The core doctrine, deconstructing the advantage of the stronger.
That famous blush is a really powerful moment, isn't it? A glimpse beneath the surface. Yet his core statement, justice is nothing other than the advantage of the stronger. It's far more intricate and open to interpretation than it first appears.
Absolutely. It's not a simple slogan.
Our sources highlight that he puts forward, quote, a swarm of different characterizations of justice, which has led to this long, complicated history of scholarly debate. How have scholars tried to find a single consistent theory amidst what seems like incoherence in his argument?
That's precisely the central puzzle scholars have wrestled with for centuries. Is Thrasymachus genuinely confused? Is he contradicting himself, or is Plato deliberately portraying him that way for effect?
Right. What's the real story?
The apparent inconsistencies in his claims have given rise to an amazingly diverse set of views among interpreters. I mean, he's been labeled everything: a legal positivist, a conventionalist, a nihilist, a natural right theorist, an immoralist, an ethical egoist, even an empirical sociologist.
Wow, that's a lot of labels for one argument.
It is. We can broadly group the major interpretive schools into a few primary categories, though. before exploring a more unifying synthetic view that many find offers a powerful potential resolution.
Okay, let's start with the main interpretations. What's the first one?
One prominent interpretation casts Thrasymachus as an advocate of legal positivism or conventionalism. The core thesis here is simple. Justice is purely obedience to the established laws, no more, of whatever state you're in.
So justice following the law, full stop.
Pretty much. It has no existence independent of what the law commands. It's a social fact, an artificial construct, not some inherent moral truth floating out there.
And where do proponents see the evidence for this?
They point directly to his explicit initial explanation. Each government makes laws to its own advantage and then proceeds to declares what they have made to be just for their subjects. For the subject, justice is reduced to simple, uncritical obedience to the dictates of the powerful. Legal positivists like George Grote, George Hirani, Leo Strauss have emphasized this aspect.
Okay, so that reading focuses on his initial definition tied to law and obedience.
Exactly. It captures that relativistic, socially constructed dimension of his thought quite well.
Okay,
But
there's always a but.
there's always a but. This view struggles a bit when trying to account for Thrasymachus' later refinement, that idea of the ruler in the precise sense.
The infallible expert rule.
Right. When Socrates points out that actual rulers can make laws not to their true advantage, Thrasymachus pivots. This refinement seems to introduce a standard, the ruler's true advantage, that goes beyond just mere obedience to any law that happens to be written down. It complicates a purely positivist reading.
Okay, so that's legal positivism. What's another major way to read him?
Another significant school interprets Thrasymachus as a natural right theorist, or, maybe more accurately, an immoralist appealing to nature. The core idea here is that his famous assertion, might makes right, isn't just a description of legal conventions, it's a deeper claim about physis, about nature itself.
So nature dictates that the strong should rule.
Essentially, yes. In this view, the true natural order is for the strong to dominate and exploit the weak for their own benefit. Conventional justice, nomos, with all its talk of fairness, restraint, equality, that's seen as an unnatural, artificial imposition.
Who imposes it then?
According to this view, it's imposed by the weak masses almost like a clever trick to inhibit the naturally superior, strong individuals.
This sounds a bit like Callicles in Plato's Gorgias.
Exactly. This interpretation highlights those striking similarities. Callicles makes a much more explicit and passionate appeal to the law of nature as justification for the strong doing whatever they want.
And the evidence for reading Thrasymachus this way?
It lies in his unabashed praise of the tyrant as the ultimate strong man who boldly casts off the chains of convention, and his assertion that perfect injustice is stronger, freer, and more masterly than justice. This reading really captures that anti-conventional immoralist thrust.
But what's the difficulty with this view?
Its main challenge is explaining why Thrasymachus initially focuses so heavily on positive law and established political regimes. Why start with nomos if his real point is about physis? He seems to evolve into this naturalistic argument rather than starting there, unlike Callicles.
Okay, so we have legal positivist and natural right moralist readings. What's the third main interpretation?
The third major interpretation frames his position primarily as ethical egoism. Here, the core thesis is fundamentally ethical and psychological.
Focused on the individual.
Yes. For any individual, acting justly invariably benefits another person at one's own expense. Conversely, acting unjustly consistently benefits the agent, the person acting. Therefore, the most rational course of action is always to relentlessly pursue your own self-interest, ignoring conventional ideas of justice.
Be selfish, it's rational.
Basically, scholars like G.B. Kerford and P.P. Nicholson emphasize his pivotal statement that justice is another's good, a Lotrian agathon, and all those detailed examples he gives of how the just man always gets less in every sphere of life, business, taxes, public office.
This sounds like a direct assault on the idea that virtue is its own reward, or that being just is actually good for you.
It is exactly that. This interpretation directly challenges the foundational tenets of Socratic ethics, which argue virtue is good for the soul and thus inherently benefits the virtuous person. It also perfectly explains why the debate in Republic book I ultimately shifts focus
from what is justice
to the deeply personal and practical question, is the just life more profitable lucet lestron than the unjust life? Which life pays better?
Makes sense. What's the challenge for this egoist interpretation?
Its main difficulty is that by focusing so heavily on the individual ethical agent, it can sometimes downplay the explicitly political and structural framing of his initial definition, justice, as the advantage of the stronger, defined in terms of ruling powers.
Right, it starts political, then seems to become individual. It's remarkable how many different plausible ways there are to read him. It almost feels like he must be contradictory. But is there a way to reconcile these views? You mentioned a synthetic reading.
Yes, and this is where things get really interesting intellectually. The apparent inconsistencies that fuel these competing interpretations can indeed be resolved, or at least productively managed, if we shift our perspective.
How so?
Instead of trying to force Thrasymachus into providing a single analytical definition in the Socratic style, we can understand him more profoundly as conducting a genealogical critique, like a debunking of the very concept of justice itself.
A genealogy of justice, like Nietzsche later.
Precisely. He isn't defining what justice is ideally. He's critically analyzing how it's constructed in society, what social function it actually serves, and what its essential effect is on the individual living under it.
So his different claims aren't competing definitions, but maybe stages in an analysis?
Exactly. Yeah. From this perspective, his three main claims aren't competing definitions at all, but rather sequential and complementary stages in a multi-layered systematic critique. It's a unified project, just not a definitional one.
Okay, that sounds incredibly modern, like a precursor to critical theory. Can you break down those stages for us? How do they fit together?
Absolutely. It's a powerful way to see the coherence.
Sociological observation, origin. Justice, in practice, begins as a legal conventional fact. What people call just in any society is simply what the ruling power has codified into law. That's the starting point. This stage perfectly accommodates the legal positivist reading, right? It describes the observable reality.
Okay, justice starts as law made by the powerful. Stage 1.
Stage 2. Function of law. What is the primary purpose of these laws? According to Thrasymachus, it's to institutionalize and serve the specific interests of those powerful rulers, often at the expense of the ruled. Justice is thus revealed as a mechanism of power, an ideological tool used cleverly to maintain a system of exploitation and control. This captures the political realist element, unveiling the power dynamics.
So, law functions to keep the powerful in power. Stage 2. What's stage 3?
Stage 3, essence for the individual agent. Now look at it from the perspective of any individual living within this system. Acting justly, following these rules, universally involves sacrificing your own good for the benefit of another, usually the ruler or the system they represent. This is precisely why the perfectly unjust man, the tyrant who serves only his own good without constraint, represents the pinnacle of power and, in Thrasymachus' disillusioned view, the ultimate path to happiness. This encompasses the ethical egoist reading the impact on the individual.
Wow. So origin law, function, power maintenance, essence, self-sacrifice for the just, self-gain for the unjust. That actually connects all the threads beautifully.
Doesn't it? This synthetic approach elegantly resolves the apparent inconsistencies by accommodating all the textual evidence that supports the other interpretations. He is simultaneously a conventionalist describing origins, a political realist describing function, and an ethical egoist describing effect.
So he's not confused. He's actually providing this incredibly powerful, multi-layered analysis of how a moral concept gets deployed as an instrument of social control.
Exactly. And this sophisticated approach makes him a direct and truly profound precursor to later genealogical critics of morality, most notably, as you said, Friedrich Nietzsche, the fourth intellectual context and enduring legacy.
It's fascinating to consider how Thrasymachus' ideas weren't just dreamt up in isolation. They were a radical, maybe even shocking contribution to the big intellectual debates of his time, particularly that famous nomos physis debate. How did his specific views stand out among his fellow sophists?
That nomos physis debate was absolutely central. It was the defining intellectual controversy of the 5th century BCE, basically questioning the relationship between human law, custom, convention, nomos, versus nature or reality, physis. Are our rules natural or just made up?
And the sophists really pushed this question.
They really did. They pushed this distinction to the forefront, questioning whether human laws and moral codes were inherently grounded in nature or were merely artificial human-made constructs that could perhaps be changed or ignored.
But they didn't all agree on the answer.
Not at all. Within this shared framework, there was a significant spectrum of opinions. Thrasymachus' position was quite distinct and, as we've seen, remarkably radical.
How did he compare to someone like Protagoras?
Well, consider Protagoras. at least as Plato depicts him. He argues for a broadly harmonious relationship between nomos and physis. In his famous great speech in Plato's dialogue Protagoras, he presents this myth where nomos, things like justice and shame, is actually a divine gift. It builds upon and perfects human nature, physis, enabling cooperative social life and civilization. For Protagoras, convention isn't just artificial, it's essential for human flourishing.
So for Protagoras, laws and customs make us better, more civilized. They complete nature.
Precisely. Then you have someone like Xenophon in his work on truth. He offers a far more oppositional view. He argues that the laws of the city, nomoi, very often conflict with the true dictates of nature, physis.
Nature versus nurture, almost.
Kind of. For Antiphon, physis inherently commands us to pursue what's advantageous, avoid pain, seek pleasure. And he goes further, radically asserting that by nature all human beings are fundamentally equal, whether Greek or barbarian. Following nomos when it conflicts with physis is, for him, ultimately harmful to your natural well-being.
So Antiphon says follow nature, not necessarily the law, because nature is about self-interest and equality. How does Thrasymachus fit in?
Thrasymachus carves out a third, distinct, and arguably even more subversive position. Like Antiphon, he sees a fundamental tension between convention and nature. But his conception of physis is starkly different. It's not equality, it's hierarchy and domination. It is natural, in his view, for the stronger to rule over and exploit the weaker.
Nature is inequality and power struggle for him.
Exactly. And crucially, for Thrasymachus, nomos, law convention, is neither a cooperative improvement upon physis, like Protagoras argued, nor just a universal, often restrictive constraint upon it, like Antiphon argued. No. Instead, nomos becomes the sophisticated instrument by which the naturally strong institutionalize and legitimize their domination over the naturally weak.
So law isn't fighting nature, the strong dominating. It's the tool of nature, the strong dominating.
Precisely. This comparison of Thrasymachus' views, which our sources highlight, fundamentally shows that, for Thrasymachus, law is not an alternative to the rule of the strong. It is its most effective and insidious tool. That's a truly radical departure in ancient political thought.
Okay, this really sets up his role in the Republic. This is where it gets truly pivotal. Thrasymachus' brutal, compelling challenge isn't just an opening act. It serves as the philosophical engine driving the entirety of Plato's massive work. How does this single, intense encounter set the stage so profoundly?
It's a great observation, and it leads to a crucial insight. You could strongly argue that without Thrasymachus' disruptive, provocative challenge, Plato might never have written the Republic in the way he did, at least not with the same urgency and depth.
Thrasymachus basically gave Plato his central problem to solve.
In essence, yes. Scholars widely agree that Socrates' arguments against Thrasymachus in Book I are, well, provisional, ultimately unsatisfying. Thrasymachus might be silenced by the end of Book I, maybe reduced to that blush, but his cynical, radical position isn't truly defeated. The core challenge still hangs in the air.
And this becomes clear later.
Explicitly clear at the beginning of Book II. Plato's own brothers, Glaucon and Adeimantus, step in powerfully. They say, essentially, Socrates, we are not convinced by your arguments against Thrasymachus. You need to give us a real defense of justice.
They resurrect the challenge.
They do, and with even greater force and sophistication. Glaucon's famous speech introduces the myth of the ring of Gyges, the invisibility ring, asking, wouldn't even the most just person act unjustly if they knew they could get away with it?
The ultimate test case.
Right. And he presents that stark comparison. The perfectly just man who has a terrible reputation for injustice versus the perfectly unjust man who cleverly maintains a reputation for being just, who is happier. They demand that Socrates praise justice for its own sake, intrinsically entirely apart from any external rewards, reputation, or consequences.
So Thrasymachus' challenge isn't just rebutted, it's revived and refined, forcing Socrates onto a much deeper, more extensive philosophical quest.
Exactly right. The remaining 9 books of the Republic constitute Plato's elaborate, systematic, monumental response to this renewed, profound Thrasymachian challenge.
The whole thing is an answer to Thrasymachus.
Pretty much the entire sweeping project constructing the ideal city, Callipolis, in theory, developing the tripartite soul, educating philosopher kings, the theory of forms, it's all a direct, sustained attempt to demonstrate, in explicit opposition to Thrasymachus, that justice is fundamentally a state of internal psychic health and harmony. that it is intrinsically good for the individual, leading to a truly happier life, regardless of external circumstances or reputation.
So Thrasymachus' argument isn't just an intro. It's the foundational problem Plato's entire political and ethical philosophy in the Republic is built to solve.
Absolutely. He sets the terms of the entire debate.
And his radical ideas cast this incredibly long shadow, don't they? Stretching across millennia, influencing some of the biggest names in political philosophy. The sheer power of his critique is evident in its persistence. Let's explore how his insights resonate with thinkers like Machiavelli and Nietzsche.
He's indeed frequently seen as a direct intellectual precursor to Niccolo Machiavelli. There's a clear lineage there.
How so? What's the connection?
Well, both thinkers are notorious for consciously separating the study of politics from traditional morality. They focus instead on the raw dynamics of power. They both meticulously analyze how rulers use the instruments of the state laws, force, manipulation to acquire and maintain their position. It's about what works, not necessarily what's good.
Realpolitik, essentially.
Exactly. However, there are crucial distinctions. We shouldn't equate them completely. Thrasymachus' ruler, as we've seen, is primarily a pure egoist, the shepherd viewing subjects as sheep for personal profit. Machiavelli's prince, while certainly encouraged to use immoral means when necessary for the state.
The ends justify the means, perhaps.
Kind of, but the end for Machiavelli is more complex. His prince operates with a more sophisticated understanding of political interest. The prince's success is fundamentally tied to the stability and glory of the state, lo Stato itself. And Machiavelli repeatedly warns his prince against earning the hatred of the people, because that's the surest path to political ruin. It's practically bad advice to be hated.
So Thrasymachus is more about raw individual gain for the ruler, while Machiavelli introduces this more calculated, almost impersonal political interest tied to the state's survival and power.
Precisely. Thrasymachus represents raw, unmediated egoism. Machiavelli's thought points more toward a calculated, impersonal ragion di stato, or reason of state. The connection to Friedrich Nietzsche, though, is perhaps even more profound and philosophically direct.
Nietzsche. How does Thrasymachus anticipate Nietzsche?
In a couple of really significant ways. First, Thrasymachus' genealogical method, that attempt we discussed to unmask justice as an ideological construct created by the powerful to control the populace, is a remarkably clear anticipation of Nietzsche's groundbreaking approach on the genealogy of morality.
Uncovering the power dynamics behind moral language.
Exactly. And second, Thrasymachus' unreserved praise for the strong individual, the audacious tyrant who bravely casts off conventional morality and boldly creates his own values, can be seen as a proto-formulation of Nietzsche's concept of master morality.
Where the powerful define what is good based on their own strength and affirmation of life.
Right. The noble individual spontaneously affirms his own power and values as inherently good. Conversely, the ideology of the subjects in Thrasymachus' model, those who dutifully obey the laws and label this obedience justice, powerfully prefigures Nietzsche's concept of slave morality.
Which originates in the resentment of the weak.
Yes, according to Nietzsche, it originates in the deep-seated resentment of the weak and, in a profound revaluation of values, transforms the master's power and characteristics into evil, while elevating weakness, humility, and obedience into virtues.
So Thrasymachus sketched out this division between value creators and the obedient masses.
In essence, yes. He provides the very first sketch of a political world fundamentally divided between the creators of values, the strong rulers, and those who are merely subject to them, the obedient populace. It's a foundational theme that Nietzsche would later develop into a comprehensive and devastating critique of Western morality itself. The echoes are really quite striking, via contemporary scholarly debates and modern reception.
It's clear Thrasymachus isn't just some historical puzzle locked away in ancient texts. He remains a figure of intense interest, vibrant debate in modern scholarship. These fundamental ambiguities around his historical identity, the coherence of his philosophy, they keep him vital, contested. What are scholars grappling with today concerning his legacy?
That's a crucial question, and it really highlights a persistent challenge when we engage with ancient philosophy. How do we effectively distinguish between what might be accurate historical reporting and what is brilliant, perhaps even manipulative literary construction by someone like Plato?
The Plato problem again. Did he invent Thrasymachus' views?
That remains a central and likely unresolvable debate. The prevailing scholarly opinion probably leans towards the idea that Plato significantly manipulated, maybe even outright invented, key aspects of Thrasymachus's philosophical position to serve his own dramatic and philosophical ends in the Republic.
What's the main evidence for that view?
Well, the stark contrast between the politically engaged, seemingly more conservative rhetorician we see in the surviving historical fragments and the wild, aggressively anti-conventional immoralist of Plato's dialogue, it's a huge gap. Plus, we have ancient testimonies from later writers, like Athenaeus, who explicitly accuse Plato of slandering his interlocutors, including Thrasymachus.
And the blush.
And the dramatic convenience of that famous blush is often cited as evidence of literary artifice, a clever move by Plato, rather than precise historical reporting.
So many scholars think Plato basically created a caricature for his own purposes. Is there a counter-argument?
There is. Some scholars maintain that the core views Plato attributes to him do actually square with what is known of the historical Thrasymachus.
Right.
They argue the underlying doctrine, even if not the brutish presentation, might be authentic.
Pointing to that pessimistic fragment about the gods and justice.
Exactly. That fragment can be plausibly read as providing a coherent philosophical foundation for the cynical political worldview we see in the Platonic character. There's also a more nuanced middle ground position.
What's that?
It suggests Plato maybe didn't invent the views wholesale, but took a concise, maybe ambiguous thesis genuinely associated with the real Thrasymachus, that phrase, the advantage of the stronger, and then used his character as a dramatic vehicle to explore its most radical, unsettling, and far-reaching implications. He pushed it to its logical extreme.
Took a real idea and ran with it, basically.
Something like that. It highlights the ongoing challenge of interpretation. Another major area of debate centers on that puzzle of coherence we discussed earlier.
Can his arguments in the Republic actually hold together as a single theory?
Exactly. Scholars remain deeply divided. As we saw, the sheer diversity of labels applied to him, legalist, conventionalist, cynic, nihilist, natural right theorist, immoralist, egoist, sociologist, vividly testifies to the immense complexity of this interpretive problem.
Was he just confused, or is there a deeper logic?
And some scholars think Plato intentionally made him sound confused. Precisely. Some, like Stephen Everson, argue Plato deliberately portrays Thrasymachus as holding confused and contradictory views. The purpose, they suggest, was to expose what Plato saw as the intellectual carelessness and philosophical bankruptcy of sophistic thought in general. On this reading, the incoherence is the point a deliberate, artistic, and philosophical choice by Plato to discredit his opponent.
While others try hard to find the underlying coherence.
Right. In contrast, other scholars undertake really sophisticated philosophical reconstructions to show there is an underlying coherence. We mentioned George Harani arguing for a consistent legalist position, or C.D.C. Reeve defending a complex but unified blend of ethical realism and semantic conventionalism. The crucial takeaway is there's no single interpretation that satisfies everyone. This vigorous debate continues today, keeping Thrasymachus very much alive in contemporary thought.
It's clear that despite all these historical and interpretive debates, his core challenge hasn't lost any power today. Where do we see his influence and ideas showing up in modern thought and contemporary discussions?
Despite all the puzzles, the Thrasymachus' fundamental challenge has lost absolutely none of its potency. He is widely hailed, maybe grudgingly sometimes, as the first great realist in the history of Western moral and political thought.
The first realist. How does that play out today?
Well, in the critical field of international relations, for instance, his core assertion that ethical considerations are ultimately subordinate to the raw dynamics of power and national interest, that's a foundational tenet of the realist school of thought.
The idea that countries act out of self-interest, not high ideals.
Pretty much. The idea that states primarily act out of self-interest, often prioritizing power and security over moral imperatives, that directly echoes Thrasymachus' ancient insights into how power operates.
What about in social and political theory more broadly?
His argument that the very language of justice often serves as an ideological veil, a cover story, for the interests of the powerful. That's a direct precursor to Marxist and other critical theories of ideology.
How dominant groups use ideas to maintain control.
Exactly. These modern theories analyze how dominant groups within a society use ideas, beliefs, norms, even moral language to maintain their power and legitimize existing social inequalities. Thrasymachus fundamentally anticipated this kind of critique millennia ago. It's quite remarkable.
That's a truly significant connection, linking him directly to some of the most influential critical thinkers of the last few centuries. What about in, say, modern psychology, how we understand human reasoning?
This is perhaps the most striking area. Thrasymachus' profound skepticism about the pure, objective role of reason in our moral and political lives has found startling echoes in modern empirical research within political psychology.
How so? What kind of research?
Well, studies on phenomena like motivated reasoning and Jonathan Haidt's social intuitionism. This research strongly suggests that we individuals frequently use our reasoning faculties not primarily to arrive at objective truth.
But to justify what we already believe.
Exactly. To rationalize and defend pre-existing emotional responses, our gut feelings, our ingrained beliefs, and our ideological commitments. Instead of facts leading impartially to conclusions, our biases and intuitions often lead us to selectively gather and interpret facts in ways that support what we already feel or believe to be true. We argue backwards from our desired conclusion.
So reason is often the servant of our passions or interests, not the master.
That's what a lot of this research suggests. And this body of modern scientific work actually lends empirical support to the Thrasymachus hypothesis. The idea that the public rhetoric of reason and justice often functions less as a pure pursuit of truth and more as a sophisticated tool to advance underlying interests or justify gut feelings.
Wow, that really brings Thrasymachus into the 21st century.
It does. It truly raises an important question for us today. Thrasymachus' ancient challenge has thus been transformed from a purely philosophical thought experiment into a live, pressing, and maybe empirically verifiable question about the very nature of democratic deliberation, the limits of public reason, and the role of persuasion versus truth-seeking in our own complex, often polarized time. Outro.
What an extraordinary journey we've taken. Through the complex, provocative, sometimes frankly uncomfortable ideas of Thrasymachus of Chalcedon.
He certainly doesn't leave you feeling comfortable.
No. We've seen him emerge from history's shadows as this brilliant, maybe cynical rhetorician, then dramatically reemerge as Plato's archetypal immoralist, and finally as a philosopher whose core ideas continue to profoundly rattle the foundations of how we understand justice and power.
He really embodies that fierce fighter role Plato maybe cast him in.
He does. He relentlessly forces us to confront uncomfortable truths. That idealism always needs to justify itself against the charge of naivete. That any robust theory of justice has to genuinely grapple with the undeniable realities of power, self-interest, and ideology.
You can't just ignore the messy reality he points to.
Exactly. His voice, whether we hear it as the historical man's or his powerful Platonic shadow, it continues to echo through any serious inquiry into that fundamental relationship between might and right, a conversation that clearly is nowhere near finished.
And thinking about this within the broader picture, Thrasymachus poses this direct challenge, really, to you as a thoughtful listener.
What's the challenge?
To look beyond the surface of moral claims. In your own life, yes, but critically. In public discourse, too. He compels us to ask, when we invoke the concept of justice, whether it's in our local communities or on a global scale, whose advantage are we truly serving? Intentionally or unintentionally?
A tough question.
And what ultimately does the answer to that question mean for the authenticity, the sincerity of our own ethical commitments? It forces a kind of uncomfortable self-reflection.
That's a truly powerful and, reflective thought to leave everyone with, and one that resonates deeply with the mission here at AI History of Western Philosophy.
Definitely pushes the boundaries.
Well, thank you for joining us on this absolutely fascinating and challenging exploration. If you found this deep dive valuable, maybe thought-provoking, please do take a moment to like, subscribe, or perhaps leave a comment.
Your engagement really does help us continue this project.
It does. It helps us continue to experiment with philosophy as material and hopefully generate some new possibilities for thought. Until next time, keep questioning, keep exploring, and keep thinking deeply.